There is something you own right now that wealthy people pay to acquire, not in theory, not as a metaphor, literally. In contracts, in equity splits, in consulting retainers, in rooms you have never been invited into. They are buying it, and you are giving it away. You have probably heard the speeches about hard work. You have heard that investing early is the secret, that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world, that you need to own real estate or index funds or both. You have tried some of those things, maybe all of them, and still the distance between where you are and where you need to be does not close the way the speeches promised it would. Here is what nobody told you. The asset that actually drives wealth for the people who have built it is not the one they talk about in public. It is invisible. It does not appear on a balance sheet. You cannot hold it in your hand or point to it on a map. But it moves through markets. It opens doors. It multiplies. And right now you are carrying it around like it costs nothing, trading it like it is worthless because no one ever told you it had a price. That changes in the next few hours. Not because you are about to receive inspiration. Inspiration is not what you are missing. What you are missing is a precise understanding of what you actually have, what the market knows it is worth, and the specific moment when you stopped seeing it as currency. By the time this is over, you will not see what you own the same way again. That shift is not small. It is the difference between working inside a system you do not understand and finally seeing the architecture of how value actually moves from one person's life into another's. Chapter 1. Rich people are buying what you are giving away. There is a pattern that repeats across every era of human civilization. In every age, in every corner of the world, a small number of people seem to see the same world as everyone else, and yet reach into it and pull out something entirely different. They walk the same streets. They hear the same news. They face the same markets. And still, they end up holding something that everyone else walked right past. This is not a story about luck. It is not a story about intelligence. It is a story about what you are looking at versus what you are actually seeing. Here is the tension that should stop you cold. The thing they are buying again and again across industries and economies and generations is something that you already own. You have owned it for years. You have been giving it away, and you did not even know it had a price. Let that sit for a moment. What comes next is going to ask you to see yourself differently. Marcus Webb was not a famous man. He was a 31-year-old who ran a food truck on the east side of a mid-sized city, selling jerk chicken and rice plates out of a converted trailer he had bought used for $4,000. He had been at the same corner every Thursday through Sunday for 6 years. He knew his customers by name. He knew who was on a diet and who was celebrating. He knew which high school coach ordered for the whole team after Friday games. And he knew which local radio host stopped by every Sunday morning before her shift. Marcus knew the neighborhood the way a doctor knows a long-time patient. Deep, specific, without having to think about it. One afternoon, a man named Daniel Oss pulled up in a rented car and asked Marcus if he had ever thought about licensing his name and his corner to a new restaurant group expanding into the neighborhood. Daniel was not offering to buy the truck. He was not offering to buy the recipe. He was offering $30,000 for what he called positioning rights. The right to say, in their marketing, that their new location was where Marcus Webb cooked. The right to use Marcus's relationships, his credibility with the neighborhood, his 6 years of trust built one plate at a time. Marcus almost said no. He almost said he did not have anything to sell. He thought of himself as a man with a truck and a recipe. Daniel saw something else entirely. Daniel saw what the market already knew. Marcus had built something invisible and extraordinarily valuable. He had built proximity premium, the trust of a specific community earned over years that any outside business would take a decade to replicate on their own. Daniel was willing to pay for the shortcut. That is the pattern. Pay attention to it. Wealthy buyers, the ones who move quietly and build quickly, are not primarily shopping for things they can see. They are shopping for things most sellers do not know they own. They are buying reputation compressed into a name. They are buying access that took years to earn. They are buying the specific gravity that pulls certain kinds of people into a room. They are buying invisible equity, and they are paying real prices for it, while the person selling it wonders if they have anything worth selling at all. Call up where things really stood at that point 3 years back, not where you wanted to be, where you actually were. Think about what you were doing, who you were around, what you were learning, what you were building without realizing you were building it. Think about the people who came to you for advice, the rooms you had access to, the information that passed through your hands as if it were ordinary. Was any of that ordinary? Or were you so close to it that you could not see what it was worth from the outside? That is the mirror moment this chapter is asking you to stand in front of. Here is the question that most people never ask. If someone were looking at your life from the outside, not as a friend but as an investor, what would they see that you have stopped noticing? This question is not rhetorical. It has a specific answer. And finding that answer is what this entire book is built around. But before you can find it, you have to understand why you missed it in the first place. There is a belief so deeply woven into modern culture that most people never question it. The belief is this: wealth is made of things you can touch, property, equipment, inventory, savings. If you can see it and count it, it is real. If you cannot, it is not an asset. It is just your life. This belief is the reason most people feel poor even when they are not. It is the reason someone can spend a decade building something genuinely valuable and still feel like they are starting from zero. It is the reason Marcus almost said no. And it is the reason the people who do say yes, the Daniels of the world, keep accumulating while everyone else stays in place. This is the villain of everything that follows in this book. Not a person, not a system, a fixed idea, tangible asset fixation. The cultural training that tells you wealth is only what you can photograph and insure. Wealthy buyers do not share this fixation. They never have. They look at a business and they are not just counting the equipment. They are measuring the relationships. They look at a neighborhood and they are not just pricing the real estate. They are pricing the trust that certain people have built inside it. They look at you and they see your network, your reputation, your years of domain knowledge, your earned access to specific communities, and they put a number on it. The tragedy is that you are often in the room when they do this, and you still do not see what they see. Consider a woman named Rosa Tran, who spent 8 years working as a patient coordinator at a community health clinic. She knew every family in a 2-mile radius who had a child with a chronic condition. She knew the insurance gaps, the cultural barriers to care, the language needs, the after-hours emergencies. She knew the pediatricians, the pharmacists, the social workers. She had built an invisible map of one of the most complicated and valuable networks in healthcare. She thought of it as her job, just her job. When she left the clinic to take a corporate position, a health technology startup approached her within 3 months. They did not want her administrative skills. They wanted her map. They wanted her relationships. They offered her a consulting retainer at 4 times her former salary to do one thing: introduce them, specifically and credibly, to the community she had spent 8 years earning the right to serve. Rosa had been giving that away for 8 years. A salary had been the price someone else placed on her invisible equity while she was not watching. Here is what the market already knows that most people do not. Access is worth more than expertise. Trust is worth more than credentials. Earned proximity to a specific group of people who matter to a buyer is worth more than almost any tangible thing you could put in a room. The market prices this constantly. It is priced into acquisition deals, consulting fees, partnership structures, and licensing agreements every single day. The only people who do not know it are the ones who own it. As this book keeps moving, you are going to meet a claim about who gets to profit from invisible equity that runs straight against the usual belief. When that point settles, it alters the decisions you make about your own time. But right now, the only thing you need to carry out of this chapter is the beginning of a different way of looking at yourself. Not as someone who has a job or a skill or a side project. As someone who has been building something, quietly and consistently, that the market has already assigned a value to. You just have not looked at the price tag yet. The inventory you never took is the most important financial document you do not have. You have spent years accumulating invisible equity. The people who understand how to buy it are already looking in your direction. The only question left is whether you will learn to see what they see before you give it away again. What are you holding right now that you have been treating as ordinary? Chapter 2. You were taught to value the wrong things. Saving money is the foundation of wealth. Almost everyone believes this. Financial advisors say it, parents repeat it, the entire self-help industry has built a library around it. And it is wrong, not partially wrong. Wrong in a way that keeps people poor while they feel responsible and disciplined. Wrong in a way that looks like wisdom right up until the moment it quietly fails you. This chapter is going to show you exactly why. More importantly, it is going to show you what was left out of the lesson. Here is the question that should stay with you as this chapter unfolds. Who decided which assets mattered and when did they decide? You were not handed a random set of beliefs about money. You were handed a curriculum. That curriculum has an origin, a designer, and a purpose. None of those 3 things were built with you in mind. Bring to mind where things really stood at that point 3 years back. Not emotionally, not relationally, but financially. Were you following the rules? Saving when you could, spending carefully, maybe paying down debt. Most people in that situation are doing everything they were taught to do, and most of them are not much further ahead than they were before. That gap between doing the right things and getting the right results is not a personal failure. It is a design flaw. The curriculum itself is the problem. Here is how this happened. In the early 20th century, the dominant economy was physical. You owned a factory or you worked in one. You held land or you farmed someone else's. Value was measured in tangible things. Machines, acreage, inventory on a shelf, cash in a safe. The rules of that economy made complete sense for that economy. Save cash, acquire property, own something you can see and count and hold. Those were rational instructions for a world built out of concrete and steel. The schools that trained workers for that economy needed to teach them how to function in it, not how to own it. So the asset education that filtered down to the general population was exactly specific enough to make someone a reliable participant in the industrial system, and no more. You learned about savings accounts. You learned about mortgages. You learned, if you were lucky, about index funds. All of it pointed toward one category of asset, the tangible kind, the visible kind. The kind you accumulate slowly from a paycheck and store in institutions that make money from the storing. Nobody taught you about invisible equity. The phrase might sound abstract right now. It will not by the end of this book. Invisible equity is the accumulated value in things you cannot put on a balance sheet, but which the market prices every single day. It is the reason one person gets a phone call that changes everything and another equally qualified person does not. It is the reason two people with identical resumes walk into a room and leave with different outcomes. The market already knows the difference between them, even when the spreadsheet cannot see it. But before you can understand what invisible equity is, you need to feel how completely it was excluded from your education. Not overlooked, excluded. Reginald was a factory floor supervisor in Akron, Ohio in 1958. He worked for a rubber manufacturing company and he was exceptional at his job. He knew the machines better than the engineers who designed them. He could predict equipment failure 3 days before it happened, just from the sound the belt made. He saved 30% of every paycheck. He owned his home. By every measure of the asset curriculum available to him, he was doing everything right. His grandson, Marcus, grew up watching that discipline and absorbed the same rules. Save, own property, work hard and hold on. Marcus followed those rules into his 30s and found himself sitting on $60,000 in savings, a mortgage, and a career that was slowly being automated out of existence. He had inherited a curriculum designed for a man standing on a factory floor in 1958. He was living in a world that looked nothing like that. The rules Marcus followed were not wrong for Reginald's world. They were wrong for Marcus's. That is the cost of an inherited curriculum that never gets questioned. The economy you operate in today does not primarily reward physical capital or stored cash. It rewards knowledge capital, relational capital, reputational capital, proximity, and the ability to deploy each of those things in a market that prices them at levels that savings accounts will never reach. These 5 categories are the subject of the next chapter, but right now, what matters is understanding why they were ignored. They were ignored because they are hard to standardize. You cannot give a person knowledge capital the way you give them a paycheck. You cannot put relational capital on a tax form. You cannot teach proximity as a subject in the same way you teach compound interest. These assets resist the kind of measurement and transfer that institutions prefer. So institutions quietly decided they did not count. But the market never agreed. Walk into any room where serious money changes hands and watch what actually drives the decision. Rarely is it a person who saved the most. Almost always it is a person who knew the right thing at the right time in the right room with the right relationship already in place. That is not luck. That is a specific class of asset deployed in a specific context. The asset just does not appear on any list your high school economics teacher ever handed out. There is something here worth pausing on without rushing past it. The people who designed the curriculum you received were not trying to hold you back. Most of them were not operating with any conscious intention at all. They were passing forward what they had been given, in the same way Reginald passed it to Marcus. The problem is that the world underneath the curriculum changed completely, and the curriculum did not. This is what tangible asset fixation costs you. Not just money. It costs you perception. When you believe only in the value of things you can count, you stop developing and worse, stop recognizing the things you cannot count. You walk past assets every day and do not see them as assets. You carry knowledge that the market would pay for handsomely, and you treat it as ordinary. You have built relationships over years that are worth more than most savings accounts, and you call them friendships, not equity. The vocabulary of the old curriculum actively prevents you from seeing what you already hold. That is the real inheritance problem, not that you did not receive enough. It is that you received a language for seeing wealth that was already out of date. In a later section, you are going to meet a claim about how to become the kind of person others pay a premium to be near that runs straight against the usual belief. After that really registers, it alters the specific actions you take this week. But right now, go back to that open question from the beginning of this chapter. Who decided which assets mattered and when did they decide? The answer is people who were optimizing for a specific economy, using the tools available at a specific moment in history, solved a problem that no longer exists in the way they described it. The solution they encoded became education. Education became belief. Belief became identity. And now you feel behind, not because you failed the system, but because you were faithfully following a map drawn for a territory that has been completely rebuilt. The proximity premium is real. That is not a motivational phrase. It is a market observation. Physical proximity to people who hold expensive knowledge and relationships produces returns that compound the way financial assets compound, except faster and with fewer gatekeepers. The people who understand this do not talk about it in those terms because the language of intangible assets has never been given a proper grammar, but they act on it constantly. They choose what rooms to enter, what conversations to stay in, what associations to build and protect. They are managing a portfolio. They just do not call it that. You have been managing assets your whole life too. You just were not taught to call them that, or to treat them with the strategic intention they deserve. Every credential you earned, every hard problem you solved, every person who trusts you, every room you have ever been the expert in, every skill you use so automatically it feels like nothing, that is a portfolio. Unorganized, undervalued, and waiting. The curriculum told you to look at your bank account and your property deed and measure your wealth. It told you to look outward at numbers you could count. It never told you to look at what you know, who you know, and what they know you can do. You were not behind. You were looking in the wrong direction. The question is not whether you have assets worth deploying. The question is whether you are ready to finally see them. Chapter 3. The 5 assets that cannot be photographed. Seeing your assets means nothing if you are looking in the wrong places. That sounds like comfort, like a polite way of saying everything is fine when clearly everything is not. It is not comfort. It is a structural observation about where value actually lives in the modern economy. Some people walk into rooms carrying enormous leverage they cannot name. Others with full bank accounts walk into the same rooms and leave with nothing. The places you have been trained to look, savings balances, car titles, the square footage of a home you may or may not own, those are real things. But they are the smallest part of what the market is willing to pay for. What the market is actually paying for, at the highest prices, cannot be weighed or photographed or counted. And once you see what those things are, you will not be able to unsee how much of it you are already carrying. This section begins with a question it intends to answer. It will take a while to answer properly. If someone handed you $1 million tomorrow but stripped away everything you could not photograph, every relationship, everything you know, every room you have access to, how long would that million last? Hold that question. Let it sit. You will know exactly why it matters before this chapter is over. Most people have spent their entire working lives accumulating things they can put on a balance sheet. That is the language schools taught and the language banks speak. The mortgage, the retirement account, the car that is paid off, these are the visible proof that you are building something. But here is what no one tells you in those early years. The economy has never actually run on visible assets. It runs on invisible ones. The visible stuff is just the record keeping. The actual value, the stuff that moves, that compounds, that creates entirely new categories of income, has always lived somewhere else. Wealthy people know this. Not because they are smarter, but because they have been inside enough transactions to watch it happen. They have seen a company with almost no physical assets sell for 9 figures because it controlled a distribution channel. They have watched someone with an ordinary resume get hired for an extraordinary salary because of who called on their behalf. They have seen a new restaurant survive on pure reputation while a technically superior one across the street closed in 8 months. They stopped believing the visible story a long time ago. And the market, the real market, not the one in the textbook, prices these invisible things constantly. It just does not label them the way you would expect. There are 5 categories. They do not all operate the same way. But every significant wealth transfer you can name in the modern economy traces back to at least one of them. The first is trust networks. A trust network is not your contact list. It is not the number of people who would recognize your name. A trust network is the specific set of relationships where someone else's credibility is available to you on request, where your word arrives in a room before you do, already believed. Think about what that is actually worth. When you need funding, when you need a referral, when you need someone to take a risk on an unproven idea, the difference between yes and no is almost never your idea. It is whether the person hearing it trusts the person who brought you to them. Trust networks are built slowly, usually without knowing they are being built. They appreciate in value the longer they go untested. The first time you call in that trust, you find out exactly what you have. The second is domain knowledge, not general knowledge. Not the kind of awareness you get from reading articles and listening to podcasts. Domain knowledge is what happens after thousands of hours inside a specific problem, when you begin to see the non-obvious patterns that no article will ever describe, because the person who could write it is too busy making money from it. A mechanic who has worked on one model of engine for 15 years does not just know how the engine works. He knows how it fails when it fails, what the failure sounds like 6 weeks before it becomes expensive. That predictive gap, that pattern recognition nobody else has yet, that is one of the most monetizable things that exists. The world pays richly for people who can predict failures before they happen in any field. What you learned the hard way is not scar tissue. It is signal. Stop for a second. Go back to where things really stood at that point 3 years back. Think about what you were dealing with, what problem you were buried inside for months or years trying to solve. You did not just survive it. You accumulated something specific about how that problem works, something most people around you do not have. That is not a small thing. The question is only whether you have named it as an asset yet, or whether you are still filing it under experience and moving on. The third category is attention access. This one is newer as a form of currency, but it is not new as a concept. Attention access is the ability to put an idea, a product, a message in front of a specific group of people who will actually consider it. Not spam, not reach, not impressions on a digital dashboard. Real, earned, warm attention, the kind where someone opens what you send because they want to, where they recommend what you share because they trust your curation, where your voice moves through a community and the community responds. If you have spent years building real credibility inside any group, a profession, a neighborhood, a creative community, an online forum, anywhere, you have attention access. Companies pay extraordinary amounts to purchase it from people who built it organically, because manufactured attention has a ceiling that earned attention does not. The fourth is distribution channels. A distribution channel is any reliable path that connects a thing of value to the people who want it. Think of a hairdresser who has done the same clients for 12 years. She is not just a stylist. She is a channel. Her chair is where things move: recommendations, referrals, products, conversations. When she mentions something, it reaches people who actually do something about it. A teacher who has been in the same school district for a decade. A supply manager who controls what 6 companies order every quarter. A person who always seems to know who is hiring before the job is posted. These are all channels. The market does not care how the channel was built. It only cares whether the channel works. The fifth is cultural fluency. This is the least obvious category and possibly the most undervalued. Cultural fluency means you can move naturally through a specific world, that you know the language, the values, the unspoken rules, the trust signals, the history of a group that most outsiders cannot access without a translator. It might be a professional culture, like knowing how hospital procurement actually works versus how the website says it works. It might be a geographic culture, like understanding the real dynamics of a specific city, neighborhood, or region. It might be an ethnic or community culture where you are trusted because you are from there, not just visiting. Cultural fluency is what allows someone to walk into a room and immediately know what matters to the people in it. And what matters in most rooms is not on any syllabus. Here is where it crystallizes. Trust networks, domain knowledge, attention access, distribution channels, cultural fluency. They do not sit in a vault. They do not appear on your tax return. Nobody handed you a certificate when you earned them. But the market has been pricing them, trading them, and making people wealthy from them continuously, whether or not those people understood what was happening. The moment you understand what was happening, you stop being the raw material and start being the architect. Now, the question this chapter opened with: if someone gave you $1 million tomorrow and stripped away every invisible asset you carry, how long would it last? The honest answer is, not long. Without a trust network, you would make expensive mistakes with no one to warn you. Without domain knowledge, you would pay retail for decisions that informed people make for free. Without attention access, any venture you started would require you to buy your way into every room. Without distribution channels, you would build things with no way to move them. Without cultural fluency, you would lose deals in the first 5 minutes of conversations you thought were going well. The million would not protect you. Your invisible assets would have protected the million. This is the reversal that changes everything. Most people spend their lives trying to accumulate visible assets first, believing the invisible ones will follow. They will not. The sequence runs the opposite direction. Invisible assets come first always. They attract and protect visible assets. They compound without inflation. They cannot be seized in a lawsuit the way a bank account can. They cannot be devalued by a market correction. And they grow specifically in the places where your life has already taken you, not in some future life you have not lived yet. Before long, You are going to meet a claim about who gets to access the highest value opportunities in any field that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that becomes real to you, it alters where you put your energy every single day. But right now, there is one question that matters more than any other. Which of these 5 categories is your primary asset? Not the one you wish it were, not the one that sounds most impressive, the one that is already true, the one the market around you has already been responding to, even if you have not yet named it that way. You have one that is stronger than the others. You have carried it through every job, every city, every room. You have been undercharging for it because you did not know what to call it. The inventory you never took is waiting. Chapter 4. Trust is a balance sheet item you are ignoring. Right now, without you doing anything wrong, money is leaving your life. Not through bad spending, not through lost bets, through a gap between how you see yourself and what you actually carry. Every week you go into a negotiation, a conversation, a room where something is being decided. You arrive with your resume, your rate, your pitch. But you arrive without your most valuable asset named, priced, or deployed. That asset has been generating returns for years. You just never wrote it down. And because you never wrote it down, you never protected it, never invested in it, never used it on purpose. The cost of that invisibility compounds. Every deal made through someone else's trusted network instead of yours. Every contract going to the person they knew, not the person who was more qualified. Every opportunity that traveled through a relationship you had not yet built. This chapter is about what that invisible asset actually is, what it is worth in numbers a bank would respect, and why the people who quietly accumulate real wealth figured this out before anyone told them to. The inventory you never took is waiting. That is where the previous chapter left you, standing at the edge of something you have not yet counted. So let us count it now. This part turns on one question from start to finish. Hold it until the answer comes. What is trust actually worth in dollars in a specific transaction, in a world where someone has to choose between 2 options of equal quality? You already know that trust matters. Everyone knows that. But knowing trust matters and knowing how to treat it like a financial instrument are entirely different skills. Most people stop at the first one. They know it, they nod about it, and then they go back to optimizing their credentials, their certifications, their portfolios. They add lines to a resume. They buy courses. They pursue designations that cost money and time and signal preparation. None of that is wrong, but it is incomplete. And incomplete strategies produce incomplete results. Remember where things really stood at that point 3 years back. The relationships you had. The people who knew your name in a context that mattered. Now think about how many opportunities in the last 36 months traveled through a person, not a platform. How many jobs were posted and filled before you saw the listing? How many clients signed with someone because a mutual contact made one phone call? How many rooms you were not in because no one thought to put you there? Those are not random events. Those are trust transactions, and they happened with or without your participation. Here is what most people miss. Trust is not a soft concept. It is an economic force with measurable movement. When trust transfers from one person to another, value follows it. That transfer is not random. It runs along relational lines. The person with the densest, most credible relational network gets the first call, the warm introduction, the quiet heads-up before the public announcement. Everyone else gets the application portal. Sandra had spent 11 years building a practice as an independent operations consultant. She was good at her work. Methodical, honest, reliable in a way that clients remembered. She never pitched hard. She never ran ads. She had a modest website she described as fine and had not updated since year 4. When she sat down to assess why her income had plateaued, her first instinct was the website. Her second was a content strategy. Her third was a new certification in a framework her larger competitors were using. She spent 4 months and significant money on that certification. Her revenue did not move. Her accountant suggested something different. He asked her to trace every dollar she had earned over the previous 3 years and write beside each client's name how that client found her. Not the category, not referral versus inbound, but the actual person or relationship that produced the introduction. Sandra resisted at first. Felt like homework without a point, but she did it anyway. What she found stopped her. 83% of her revenue over 3 years traced back to 7 people, not 7 campaigns, not 7 platforms. 7 individuals who trusted her enough to say her name out loud in a room where a decision was being made. 7 people who had worked with her, seen her handle something difficult, or heard her speak plainly when plain speech was rare. She mapped the introductions. She saw the chain. Client A had been introduced by a former colleague named Marcus. That same colleague had introduced 2 others. A woman named Tina had referred 3 clients in a single calendar year without Sandra ever asking her to. The total revenue traceable to those 7 relationships over 36 months was $400,000. Sandra had never tracked this. She had never thanked these people proportionally, never invested in those relationships deliberately, never asked herself what would have happened if one of them had moved cities or changed industries or simply drifted. She had been treating her most productive asset like ambient weather, something that happened around her rather than something she had built and could continue to build. That is the parable worth sitting with before we go further. Because here is what the numbers reveal. Trust is not just warm, it is directional. It moves toward people who have earned it and away from people who have not. And it does not move slowly. In high-stakes moments, trust moves in a single sentence. When someone says, "Call this person, I trust her completely," years of compounded credibility transfer in 10 words. That transfer is worth money. In many cases, it is worth more than any credential you could purchase, because credentials signal potential and trust signals proof. The proximity premium is real. It compounds in a way that certificates do not. When you are physically, professionally, and relationally close to the people who make decisions, you see opportunities before they are named as opportunities. You hear the tension before the contract is written. You are in the conversation when the problem is still being defined, which means you have the chance to shape how the solution is imagined. Everyone else comes in after the shape is fixed. Being trusted enough to be close costs nothing to maintain but everything to lose. What does it cost to lose trust? 1 broken commitment. 1 moment of misrepresentation. 1 time your interest overrode your honesty in a conversation where someone was counting on your honesty. Trust is asymmetric in a particular direction. It accumulates slowly and depletes fast. That asymmetry is not a reason to treat it as fragile. It is a reason to treat it as serious. Serious the way a business owner treats cash flow. Serious the way a surgeon treats sterility. Not with anxiety, but with consistent, professional respect. Now think about this. The market already knows who is trusted in your field. You may not have made the list visible to yourself yet, but the market has its own accounting. The person who gets tapped for the committee is trusted. The person whose name comes up unprompted in a meeting they are not in is trusted. The person who raises an uncomfortable truth and is thanked for it rather than avoided afterward is trusted. The market prices trust into every transaction, even when the transaction looks like it is purely about skill or price. Two equally skilled vendors. One is known and trusted in the network. One is not. The known one wins at a higher price. Every time. Here is what this means for you right now. You have some level of trusted standing in some context, built over years of showing up and being honest and doing what you said. That standing has value you have not inventoried. And every day you operate without an inventory is a day you risk underpricing yourself, misdirecting your energy, or losing something irreplaceable without realizing it was there. The trust inventory is not complicated. You need to answer 3 questions. Who in your current network would say your name unprompted in a room where something important was being decided? What contexts are those rooms in? Industry, geography, function? And what have those introductions actually produced in your life in the last 3 years, if you took the time to trace them the way Sandra did? That last question will probably surprise you. Most people find, when they trace it, that more of their income, opportunity, and access came through trusted relationship than through any platform, credential, or marketing effort they ran. Most people discover they have been investing in the channels that feel productive while ignoring the asset that actually produced. Down the line in this book, you are going to meet a claim about how quickly a valuable network can be built that runs straight against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it alters how deliberately you spend the next 6 months. But right now, the piece to hold is this. Trust is a balance sheet item. It belongs on the left side with your assets, not in the footnotes labeled soft skills or professional reputation. It has produced quantifiable returns. It is subject to investment and neglect. It compounds when maintained and depletes when ignored. The only reason it is not on your balance sheet today is that no accounting software has a field for it. That gap in the software is not a gap in reality. The invisible equity you carry has been working for you already. You just have not been managing it. And the difference between something working for you and something you are managing is the difference between luck and strategy. One trusted relationship in the right context is worth more than any credential you could purchase. That is not an inspiration line. That is a market observation. The next question is which relationships in your life are worth the most, and whether you know the answer. Chapter 5. What your daily knowledge is worth on the open market. Saving money will not make you wealthy. That sounds like something a reckless person says to justify spending. It is not. It is an observation about arithmetic. Saving preserves what already exists. Wealth is built by creating something new. The question becomes what you have that could be made into something new, something sellable, something a market will pay for. Here is where most people stop. They look around at their apartment, their car, their bank balance, and conclude they have nothing. But they are only looking at what they can see. They are forgetting everything they know. This chapter is about knowledge, not abstract knowledge, not the kind you acquire from a self-help book or a weekend seminar. The specific operational knowledge that lives inside your daily work, your professional habits, the decisions you make so automatically you have stopped noticing you make them. That knowledge has a price. Strangers are selling it right now, and in most cases they know less than you do. Here is the open loop you need to hold on to as you listen. There is a gap between what your knowledge is worth and what you are currently paid for it. That gap has a number. By the end of this chapter, you will have a way to estimate it. Move back to 3 years ago for a moment in your career, your trade, your field. Think about what you did not know then that you know now, not just in theory, but in practice, in your hands, in the judgment calls you make before noon on any given Tuesday. Whatever that gap is between the person you were then and the person operating today, that gap is a product. Someone else would pay to close it faster than you did. Most people have never thought of their experience that way. They think of what they know as a credential, or a qualification, or just the thing that gets them through the day. The invisible equity in that knowledge, the compounded value of years of repetition, error, and correction, never gets measured. No one ever asked them to measure it. The culture of employment teaches you to sell time. 40 hours a week, a fixed rate, a bi-weekly deposit. It is a clean transaction, and it trains you to think of yourself as an hourly asset instead of an intellectual one. That distinction matters more than almost anything else in this book. Consider Marcus Webb. Marcus spent 11 years working as a lead plumber for a commercial contracting firm in the Midwest. Not residential, commercial. Hotels, hospitals, school buildings, mixed-use developments. Over those years, Marcus developed a specific and detailed understanding of a problem that no one talks about at dinner parties, but that costs commercial operators millions of dollars a year. Cross-contamination risk in building water systems. Backflow incidents. Improper pipe pressurization. The kind of installation errors that pass initial inspection and fail catastrophically 2 years later. Marcus had seen enough of these failures up close that he could look at a set of blueprints and identify 3 or 4 likely failure points before a single pipe was laid. He knew this. He had always known it in the sense that he used it daily. What he did not know was that someone would pay for it. A colleague mentioned offhand that a regional hospital network was paying a consulting firm $60,000 to conduct a one-day safety audit of their facilities. Marcus looked up the firm. He found their materials online. He read through their methodology, their language, their recommendations, and he sat very still for a while, because what he was reading was a more expensive and less detailed version of what he already knew. He reached out to a smaller hospital group directly. He told them plainly what he could offer and what he had seen. He offered a pilot engagement. They accepted. That pilot became a retained advisory contract. Within 20 months, Marcus had formalized a training module for facilities staff, a 4-hour course he delivered on site, and had sold it to 6 commercial operators at rates ranging from $18,000 to $34,000 per engagement. 2 years after sitting with that catalog, Marcus had generated over $200,000 from knowledge he had been giving away inside a salary for more than a decade. He did not build a personal brand. He did not create a podcast. He found buyers who had a problem he could solve, and he showed them he could solve it. The market already knows what operational expertise is worth. It is known for a long time. What the market cannot do is find you if you have never entered it. Now here is where most people who hear a story like Marcus's respond in one of 2 ways. The first group says, "That's amazing, but Marcus had something rare." The second group says, "I don't know enough to do that." Both responses are wrong, and they are wrong for the same reason. They treat knowledge as a fixed object that either exists or doesn't, rather than as a relative position in a market. You do not need to know everything. You need to know more than the person who needs your help. That is it. That is the entire qualification requirement. A project manager who has navigated 17 software implementations inside a mid-sized company knows more about that specific process than someone starting their first one. A nurse who has spent 6 years in a specialty ward knows more about patient communication in that context than a hospital system trying to train its new intake staff. A bookkeeper who has worked with small restaurants for a decade knows more about the specific cash flow patterns of that industry than a generalist accountant. None of these people are famous. None of them have a credential that says expert on it. But each of them occupies a position of proximity to a problem that someone else is actively paying money to solve. Proximity premium is the name for what they hold. The closer your experience sits to the actual point of failure, the actual moment of risk, the actual place where something goes wrong or right, the higher the value of what you know. Think about your own daily work. What are the failures that others do not see coming but you have learned to predict? What are the questions that junior people in your field get wrong in the first 2 years? What is the thing your clients, your boss, your organization gets consistently wrong that you have learned to quietly correct? That zone right there is where your sellable knowledge lives. There are 3 primary ways people convert this kind of knowledge into direct income. They are not equal in terms of time investment or revenue ceiling. The first is consulting. You charge for access to your judgment on a specific problem, typically by the hour or by the project. The barrier to entry is low. You need one client and the ability to scope what you're delivering. The income is immediate, but it scales with your time, which means at some point you hit a ceiling. The second is advisory work. This is a retainer relationship, usually monthly, where a company or individual pays for ongoing access to your thinking. Advisory work is more passive than consulting because the deliverable is availability and input rather than execution. It pays less per hour of actual work, but it creates predictable recurring income and requires no physical product. The third is courseware or training. You package your knowledge once and deliver it repeatedly. This is what Marcus moved toward. A 4-hour on-site training can be priced on the value it delivers to the buyer, not on the time it takes you to deliver it. Once you have refined it through 3 or 4 engagements, the delivery becomes efficient. The economics shift dramatically. Most people start with consulting, move toward advisory once they have proven results, and create training or packaged curriculum once they have something repeatable worth formalizing. You do not have to do all 3. You may only need one. What you do need is a knowledge audit, a deliberate inventory of what you have accumulated that the market cannot get without access to you or someone like you. Here is how you begin. Take a piece of paper. Divide your experience into problems and solutions. For every major category of your professional life, write down the problems that come up repeatedly. Then write what you do about them, not theory, what you actually do. What you have learned works and what you have learned does not work, and the reason behind both. When you have filled even one side of that page, you will find something unexpected. The solutions column will look obvious to you and cryptic to almost everyone outside your specific experience. That gap is not a personal quirk. That gap is inventory. A little later, we will reach an idea about how expertise gets priced that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that lands, it starts changing how you approach every professional conversation you have from that point forward. The knowledge audit is not a final product. It is the first honest look at what you carry. Think of it the way a business takes stock at the end of a quarter, not because the stock is going anywhere, but because you cannot sell what you have not counted. Here is what connects back to where this chapter began. The gap between what your knowledge is worth and what you are currently paid for it is not a mystery. It is a measurement problem. You have not measured it because no one taught you to look at your experience as inventory. You have been inside employment long enough that the invisible equity of what you know has started to feel like background noise, rather than an asset with a price attached to it. Marcus Webb did not discover something new. He looked at something old through a different frame. The expertise you use for free every day is being sold by strangers who know less than you. Chapter 6. Attention is the commodity billionaires are fighting over. Something is being taken off your side of the table already, and the taking is so quiet you have probably never noticed it happening. Every hour you spend consuming content, scrolling through feeds, watching videos, reading posts, that time is not neutral. It is being converted. Converted into revenue for platforms, into influence for creators, into data for advertisers, into leverage for companies whose valuations are built not on factories or inventory, but on the number of people who pay attention to them. Your attention is the raw material, and the remarkable thing is that you have been giving it away for free. Meanwhile, a small number of people have quietly figured out that human attention, close, trusted human attention, is the most valuable economic commodity of this era. That question deserves a real answer. Where is your attention going, and what are you getting in return? By the end of this chapter, that question will carry a very different weight than it does right now. Here is something that will seem counterintuitive at first. The people who are winning this economy are not necessarily the ones with the most money. They are the ones with the most trusted attention. That distinction will matter enormously before this chapter is done. Let us start with what is actually being traded. Every major platform, every advertising network, every media company, every subscription service built in the last 20 years has one foundational business model underneath all the surface variations. They acquire attention and sell access to it. That is the whole engine. Facebook does not sell social connection. It sells the attention of people having social connections. YouTube does not sell video. It sells the eyeballs watching video. Spotify does not just sell music. It sells listener data and advertiser access to ears. The product in almost every case is you, or more precisely, the version of you that is paying attention. Look back at the shape of your life at that point 3 years back. Think about the platforms you used, the accounts you followed, the content you consumed. Now ask yourself honestly, who profited most from those hours? Not in a bitter way. Just as a clean observation, someone built something valuable with your attention. The question is whether any of that value ever flowed back in your direction. For most people, the answer is no, and not because they were foolish, because they never knew they were holding anything. Now here is the open loop, the question this chapter will carry forward and then close. If your attention has measurable economic value, and it does, the market has already priced it, the billion-dollar valuations prove it, then what happens when you are the one holding the attention of others? What changes when, instead of being the audience, you are the trusted source? Hold that question. The answer is coming. There is a man named Marcus who ran a small landscaping business in a mid-sized city. He had about 400 email subscribers, people who had signed up over a couple of years to receive his occasional tips about lawn care, seasonal planting, and pest control. He wrote these emails himself, usually on Sunday nights, in plain language, in about 10 minutes. He never thought of these 400 people as anything other than occasional customers. He thought of his business as the trucks, the equipment, the labor, the accounts. One spring, a company that sold lawn treatment products reached out. They had found his emails, read through his archive, and made him an offer. They wanted to pay him to mention their product in 3 emails over a 6-week period. The offer was not a fortune, but it was real money for 3 paragraphs of honest writing he would have done anyway. Marcus almost said no. He did not think of himself as someone with an audience. He thought of himself as a landscaper. He said yes. He was careful about it, only writing about the product honestly, only recommending it because he had tried it. His subscribers bought it in meaningful numbers. The company came back. They offered a longer arrangement. Within 18 months, Marcus was earning more from his list of 400 people than from 2 of his regular commercial accounts. He had owned this asset for 2 years without knowing what it was worth. The trucks and equipment, those he had insured, maintained, and tracked. The 400 people who trusted his opinion, he had never counted them as part of his balance sheet at all. That is what tangible asset fixation does to people. It trains your eye toward the visible and away from the invisible. Marcus always knew what his equipment was worth. He had never once asked what his trust was worth. Here is the principle underneath Marcus's story, and underneath everything this chapter is building toward. Attention is scarce. Human time is finite. Every person alive has a limited number of hours per day to give their attention to something. That limit makes attention genuinely scarce in the economic sense. And when something is scarce and in demand, it has a price. But not all attention carries the same price. This is where most people's intuition breaks down. Passive attention, the kind you give when you scroll without really stopping, when you half-watch, when you are present in body but absent in focus. That attention has some value, but not much per unit. Platforms need it in massive scale to make it worth anything. You need millions of passive glances to build a real business from passive attention alone. But close attention is different. The kind you give when someone has genuinely earned your trust, when you read every word, when you act on what they say, when you open their emails before anyone else's. That attention commands a premium, a proximity premium. The economics of close, trusted attention are entirely different from the economics of passive mass attention. And this is the insight that most people miss completely. 100 people who genuinely trust you are not just 1% of 10,000 passive followers. They are worth more. Per person, per relationship, per dollar of economic activity they generate, 100 trusted people outperform 10,000 passive ones in nearly every category that matters: conversion, loyalty, word of mouth, repeat engagement, and price tolerance. People who trust you will pay prices that strangers will not. They will recommend you in places you cannot advertise. They will defend your reputation without being asked. The market already knows this. That is why companies pay premiums to micro-influencers. That is why a niche newsletter with 2,000 subscribers and an 80% open rate is more valuable to an advertiser than a magazine with 200,000 readers who skim the headlines. The proximity premium is real. It is priced. It is already being traded. You just may not have known it applied to you. Now apply this directly. Think about your own life, not abstractly, but specifically. Think about who comes to you for advice. Think about the people in your professional circle who ask your opinion before making a decision. Think about the coworkers who route their questions through you, the friends who share your recommendations, the online community where your comments get read and responded to. That is an attention asset. It may be small. It may be informal, but it is real and it has a quality score, and most people have never thought to measure it. Here is a rough way to think about your attention asset. Size is the number of people who give you close attention, who read what you write, who listen when you speak, who seek your input rather than waiting for it. Quality is the degree of trust in that attention. Do they act on what you say? Do they return to you when they have new questions? Do they send others your direction? A small number of high-quality relationships produces more economic leverage than a large number of shallow ones. Most people undersell their size because they only count formal audiences. Most people undersell their quality because they have never thought to measure it. You may have a closer and more trusted audience than you think. The inventory you never took may already contain something significant. Further on, we will reach an idea about how attention converts into income that runs straight against the usual belief. When that becomes clear, it starts changing how you decide to spend your time going forward. But right now, close the loop. Remember the question this chapter opened. What happens when you are the one holding the attention of others? What happens is this. Your options expand. Not all at once, not dramatically, but structurally. When people trust you and pay attention to you, you can recommend things you believe in and generate income from those recommendations. You can offer your knowledge directly rather than filtering it through an employer who captures most of its value. You can create something once and have it seen by people who are already primed to receive it well. You can build relationships with companies, institutions, and individuals who want access to the audience you hold. None of this requires fame. None of it requires a large platform. It requires only that the attention you hold is genuinely trusted. Marcus never set out to build an audience. He was a landscaper. He wrote emails about grass. But he had been consistent, honest, and useful for 2 years. That consistency had built something real without him ever naming it. When he finally looked at what he had, he saw an asset. Not the most glamorous one, not the one that would make him a millionaire overnight, but a real, functioning, income-producing asset created out of nothing but trustworthy repetition. You may be sitting on something similar right now. The expertise you use for free every day is being sold by strangers who know less than you. And the people who already trust you are the reason that expertise has a price at all. Attention is not a side effect of success. For more and more people, in more and more industries, it is the currency that makes success possible in the first place. So the question worth sitting with tonight is not how you get more attention. It is simpler and more important than that. What would change if you finally started treating the attention you already hold as something worth protecting? Chapter 7. Distribution is worth more than the product. Selling a better product is almost never the reason someone wins a market. That sounds like an insult to every person who has spent years refining their craft, improving their service, obsessing over quality. It is not an insult. It is a map. Once you understand what actually determines who wins, you stop spending all your energy on the thing that matters least. You start building the thing that matters most. Here is the question that needs to live in your mind for the next several minutes. If 2 people sell the exact same product, same quality, same price, same packaging, who makes more money? The answer sounds obvious until you realize most people get it wrong. They say the better marketer. They say the harder worker. Some say the luckier one. The real answer is the person with more distribution. Not the better product, not the flashier brand, the pipe, the channel, the trusted path that gets the thing in front of people who are already listening. Hold that question. Who wins when everything else is equal? The answer will come back before this chapter is done, and when it does, it will land differently than you expect. The previous chapter asked what would change if you started treating your attention as something worth protecting. This chapter answers a different version of that question. What would change if you realized the pipe you already own is worth more than anything flowing through it? Think about the last time you bought something you did not plan to buy. Not an impulse grab at a checkout counter. A real purchase, something that cost you real money or real time. Now trace backwards. How did you find it? Almost certainly it came through a channel you already trusted, someone you followed, a newsletter you had been reading for months, a community where someone whose judgment you respected said 3 words about it. The product did not reach you. The channel reached you. The product just rode along. This is the invisible logic that built enormous fortunes. Most people never see it because they are staring at the products. There is a woman named 𝗓𝗓𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗧 who spent 4 years writing a free newsletter about personal finance for first-generation college graduates. She wrote it every Tuesday from a tiny apartment in Columbus, Ohio. She had no staff, no investors, no distribution deal. She had a subscriber list that grew from 40 people she personally invited to a little under 11,000 readers. Most of them had been with her for at least a year. Open rates that most professional media companies would consider exceptional. Reply rates that advertising agencies would have paid significant money to study. She was not famous. She had no product. She had a pipe. A regional media company came to her. They were acquiring adjacent newsletters to bundle into a larger platform. They looked at her numbers and made her an offer. The offer was not based on her content archives. It was not based on her writing talent, though she had real talent. It was based on the size, trust, and engagement of her audience. They paid her 12 times her annual revenue. Not 12 times her profit, 12 times her top line. Her readers had never seen a dollar change hands. Her readers had no idea they were the asset being priced. 𝗓𝗓𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗧 did not sell a product. She sold the pipe that connected her to 11,000 people who had proven, week after week, that they would open what she sent. Let that sit for a moment before we move forward. Here is what most people get wrong about that story. They hear it and think, she got lucky, she was consistent, she found a niche. They file it under rare exception. What they miss is the structure underneath. What made 𝗓𝗓𝗧𝗔𝗡𝗧's newsletter valuable was not that it existed, it was that it was trusted. And trust, over time, inside a distribution channel, compounds exactly the way money inside a good investment compounds. Quietly, invisibly, and at a rate that eventually shocks people who have not been watching. The market already knows this. Wealthy buyers, the companies and funds that acquire businesses and assets for real money, have known it for a long time. They do not pay for products. Products are reproducible. Any sufficiently funded competitor can reverse engineer a product, price it lower, ship it faster. Products are not the scarce thing. The pipe is the scarce thing. Proximity premium is the name for what actually gets priced when distribution gets acquired. It is the premium that comes from being close to a trusting audience, not adjacent to them, not reaching them through a third party, not hoping they click an ad. Close, directly in the room with them week after week with their permission and their attention. That proximity is what makes distribution so expensive to buy and so valuable to own. Now ask yourself something. Ask honestly and without rushing past the discomfort of the answer. What channels do you already have access to that you have never thought of as assets? Not the follower counts. Follower counts are vanity unless they represent real recurring attention. Think smaller. Think more specific. The group chat where 800 people in your industry ask questions, and you happen to be the one who answers most of them. The email list of 140 former clients who genuinely like hearing from you. The community inside a professional association where you are known. The Discord server, the Slack workspace, the subreddit where your name carries enough weight that people stop scrolling when you post. These are pipes. They are narrow pipes, but they are trusted ones, and trusted ones are exactly what buyers pay premiums for. The size is not the point. The trust is the point. There is a contractor named Marcus Webb who spent 11 years doing renovation work in a mid-sized city in the Midwest. Over those years, he built a client list of around 320 households. He kept a simple email list. Nothing fancy, nothing automated. Once a month he sent a short note, sometimes a tip about home maintenance, sometimes a before and after photo from a recent project, sometimes just a note that he had openings in his schedule. He never thought of it as a business asset. It was just how he stayed in touch. When Marcus decided to slow down and sell his business, the buyer wanted that list as a non-negotiable part of the deal. Not his tools, not his vans, the list. Because that list represented 320 households that had trusted Marcus enough to invite him into their homes. That trust was transferable to whoever operated under his name next. The buyer paid more than Marcus expected. He told a friend afterward that he felt strange accepting that much for what he had always thought was just his way of being polite. He had spent 11 years building a pipe without ever calling it that. You have spent years building something too. The inventory you never took is full of things like Marcus's list. Things you have created and curated and cultivated without ever assigning them a value. A community is distribution. A trusted email list is distribution. A reputation inside a specific professional circle is distribution. An audience of even a few hundred people who genuinely read what you send them is distribution. You have been building assets without counting them. The reason this stays invisible for most people is the tangible asset fixation. That deep cultural habit of only counting what you can hold, see, or immediately convert to cash. A list of email addresses feels insubstantial. A community feels like a hobby. A reputation in a niche market feels like soft capital, not real capital. And so people walk past the most valuable thing they own. On the way to spend money on something they can see, inventory, equipment, a website redesign, things that are real and heavy and reassuringly solid, and almost never the reason someone actually wins. Distribution is the reason someone wins. Soon, we will reach an idea about how to price their own expertise that runs straight against the usual belief. After that clicks, it starts changing every conversation you have about what to charge. But right now, stay in this chapter. The principle being handed to you here requires sitting with. It is not a tactic. It is a reorientation. You have been thinking about your business, your career, your side work, your professional life in terms of what you produce. The output, the deliverable, the thing you make and sell, that thing does matter. But it is not the asset. The asset is the channel through which that thing travels, the relationship between you and the person on the other end, the reason they opened this in the first place. Go back to the open loop from the beginning of this chapter. Two people, same product, same price. Who wins? The person with distribution, not the better product, not the harder worker. The person who built the pipe that reaches people who already trust what comes through it. Now the harder version of that question. Which of those two people are you today? Not as a judgment, as a diagnostic. If you are pouring everything into the product and almost nothing into the distribution, you are working against the actual economics of the market. You are building the river while ignoring the riverbed. You are filling a bucket while the pipe sits unused in the corner. The market already knows what distribution is worth. The only person in the room who has not priced it yet is you. What would you build differently starting tomorrow if you treated your distribution channel as the most valuable thing you own? Chapter 8. Cultural fluency is a premium nobody advertises. Something is being extracted from you right now, and you are not being paid for it. Not a little, not occasionally, constantly and at scale. Every time a brand guesses wrong about a neighborhood, Every time a company rolls out a campaign that lands flat in a room you grew up in, every time a product feels like it was designed by someone who has never spent a single afternoon in the kind of place you know by memory, someone is losing money. Enormous money. And the knowledge that would have saved them is sitting inside you, fully formed, completely real, entirely unpaid. That gap between what they do not know and what you carry is not a small thing. It is not a curiosity. It is a market. Right now, that market is operating without you. Which means it is operating at a loss, their loss, while you go about your day unaware that you are holding something they would pay to borrow. That question deserves to sit with you for a moment. What are they actually paying for? The answer is going to take this chapter somewhere you may not expect. The previous chapter asked you what you would build differently if you treated your distribution channel as the most valuable thing you own. That question was designed to crack open one specific assumption, that your value lives in what you produce rather than where it travels and who receives it. This chapter cracks open a second assumption, one that goes even deeper. Before anything you create can travel anywhere, it has to be understood. And understanding, real understanding, not the performed kind, not the researched kind, but the kind that comes from living inside a world that is not something money can manufacture from scratch. It can only be purchased from someone who already has it. That someone might be you. Here is the open loop that will anchor this chapter. There is a number attached to this kind of knowledge. A specific, real, documented number. You will hear it before this chapter ends. And when you do, the way you describe yourself in a professional context will never be quite the same. Cultural fluency is a strange phrase. It sounds academic. It sounds like something a university would offer as an elective. But strip it down and what you have is simply this: the ability to move through a specific community with natural, unforced understanding. You know the spoken codes and the unspoken ones. You know which words carry weight and which ones signal that someone is an outsider trying too hard. You know what a neighborhood actually needs versus what outsiders assume it needs. You know how decisions get made, how trust gets built, how time gets spent. You know what people actually spend money on versus what they tell a survey they spend money on. That knowledge took years to accumulate. You did not study it, you lived it, and that distinction is everything. Return to the shape of your life at that point 3 years back, not the polished version, the honest one you were living in, the places you went, the people around you, the language you used without thinking, the unwritten rules you navigated every single day. Now ask yourself, could someone parachute into that world, spend a weekend there, and genuinely understand it? Could they read 3 reports and a demographic breakdown and actually get it? You already know the answer, and so does every company that has tried. That failure, the expensive, public, sometimes embarrassing failure of outsider interpretation, is the engine behind a growing and underreported market. Companies are not just hiring researchers anymore. They are hiring people who carry the actual context. They call them cultural consultants, community liaisons, market translators, authenticity advisors. The titles vary. The need is the same, and the need is urgent, because the cost of getting it wrong has become very visible very fast. This is where Marcus comes in. Marcus grew up in a part of Detroit where 3 things were always true. Money was scarce, community was dense, and the line between surviving and thriving was drawn by relationships, not resources. He learned early how to read a room. He learned which businesses had earned trust in that neighborhood and which ones were merely tolerated. He learned the specific way a discount was offered that felt respectful, versus the way an identical discount felt condescending. He learned the music that played in certain stores on purpose, and what that music was actually communicating. He learned all of this the way you learn a language from childhood, not through study, through total immersion over years and years of ordinary life. Marcus went to college on a partial scholarship, worked in retail management for 5 years, and eventually ended up at a mid-size marketing agency. He spent most of his time quietly correcting campaigns that were about to land wrong. He was good at his job. He was not compensated at a level that reflected that. One afternoon, a colleague forwarded him an email. A Fortune 500 consumer goods company was looking for someone to consult on a product launch targeting urban communities in the Midwest, specifically Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland. They needed someone who could tell them not just what those markets looked like, but how they thought. Marcus applied, expecting nothing. He got the call. The first session lasted 3 hours. He sat across a table from 8 people with elite degrees and expensive shoes. They were taking notes on everything he said, not politely, urgently. He described how trust was built in corner stores versus chain stores. He explained the specific way certain phrases in their proposed campaign would be received, and why. He told them which visual choices communicated respect and which ones, despite good intentions, communicated the opposite. He did not read this from a report. He knew it. The room went quiet in that particular way rooms get quiet when people realize they are hearing something they cannot get anywhere else. The invoice for those 3 hours was $1,800, $600 an hour, and the company paid it without a single revision request. What Marcus had given them in that room was worth more than what they paid. Far more. The internal research they had conducted over the previous 6 months had not answered the questions he answered in the first 40 minutes. That is the proximity premium made concrete, not theoretical, paid, documented, real. Now here is what most people do with a story like Marcus's. They file it under exceptional. They decide he had some rare combination of circumstances that positioned him perfectly. They find the one detail that does not match their own life and use it to disqualify the whole thing. That filing system is costing you money. What Marcus had was not unique to Marcus. It was specific to his experience, yes. But the structure of what he had, deep, lived, unacademic knowledge of a world that outsiders cannot access authentically. That structure exists in countless people who have never once thought of it as an asset. People who grew up inside immigrant communities and understand the actual decision-making logic of those households. People who spent years inside religious institutions and understand the trust architecture of those networks. People who grew up in rural towns and understand the purchasing psychology of communities that every coastal marketer consistently misreads. People who came up through trade culture, or gaming culture, or specific regional subcultures that carry enormous purchasing power and almost no authentic corporate representation. The market already knows this gap exists. The invisible equity question is simply whether you know that you hold something on the other side of it. Companies are spending billions of dollars every year trying to reach communities they do not understand. Some of that money goes to research. Some of it goes to agencies. Some of it goes to campaigns that fail. And a growing slice of it is going to individual consultants, people like Marcus, people like someone sitting in your position, who can offer what no amount of external research can replicate. The genuine article. This is not a side hustle suggestion. This is a structural observation about where a specific kind of value lives and who holds it. Cultural fluency is a premium asset because it cannot be manufactured quickly. It takes years of proximity to build. That makes it rare. Rare things command prices. That is not a philosophy. That is how markets work. Later on, we will reach an idea about who gets to charge premium rates for their knowledge that runs straight against the usual belief. Once you grasp that turn, it starts changing how you position every skill you have ever underpriced. But right now, the immediate work is an inventory, not a resume. An inventory, not of your job titles or your credentials. An inventory of the worlds you have moved through, the communities you understand by feel, the places where you automatically know things that someone from outside would have to spend years learning and might still get wrong. Every one of those is a map that someone, somewhere, needs and does not have. The asset poor people own without knowing it and rich people pay to access is exactly this kind of knowledge. Lived, specific, non-transferable through a textbook, invisible in every traditional accounting of personal wealth, and therefore invisible to the people who carry it. That invisibility is the only thing standing between what you currently earn and what you could earn. Marcus is not exceptional. He was simply the first version of himself who looked at what he knew and said, "This is worth something." He named it. He priced it. He walked into that room. The question is not whether you have something comparable. You do. The question is whether you are willing to take the inventory you have been postponing, name what you find there, and walk into a room of your own. What would change tomorrow if you treated everything you know about your world as a product someone already wants to buy? Chapter 9. Why you keep giving your best asset away for free. The most expensive thing you will ever do is work for free, and you have been doing it your whole life. That sounds like an accusation. Maybe it stings a little, which means it landed somewhere true. But this is not an indictment. It is a diagnosis. Once you see the exact mechanism by which you drain your own invisible equity before anyone ever gets a chance to pay you for it, you cannot unsee it. And the moment you stop, everything about how the market responds to you begins to shift. You ended the last chapter with a question hanging in the air. What would change tomorrow if you treated everything you know about your world as a product someone already wants to buy? That question was not rhetorical. It was a test. The gap between reading that sentence and actually behaving differently is where most people stall. Not because they lack the knowledge, not because the market isn't there, but because something deep inside them resists charging for what comes naturally. That resistance has a name, a shape, and a source. You are going to meet all three. Here is the open loop. Hold on to it. There is a specific moment, not a mindset, not a philosophy, a specific recognizable moment, when the market decides what you are worth. You will find out exactly when that moment is before this chapter ends. And once you know it, you will understand why everything you have done before it either confirms or destroys your price. Think about the last time someone asked for your help. Maybe they needed advice on something you have handled before. Maybe they had a problem in your area. You gave it freely. You talked through the situation, offered your knowledge, probably followed up, maybe even checked back in to see how it went. And you felt good about it. That felt like generosity. That felt like who you are. Here is where it gets complicated. It was generous. And it also cost you something you never counted. Generosity conditioning is the first mechanism. You learned, probably before you had words for it, that giving freely made you valuable to the people around you. Approval followed helpfulness. Safety followed approval. The neural path got worn deep. By the time you were an adult, giving away your best thinking was not a decision. It was a reflex shaped like virtue. The problem is that the market does not reward reflexes. It rewards positioning, and a reflex has no price. Watch how this plays out in real life. Marcus was a logistics coordinator for a mid-size freight company for 11 years. He knew how regional carriers priced their routes. He knew which lanes were underserved. He knew why certain shipments got delayed and exactly which relationships to pull to fix them. His colleagues asked him questions constantly. His manager relied on him to troubleshoot. When new people joined the team, they learned the job through Marcus, not the onboarding materials, because Marcus just knew. And every time someone asked, he told them, completely, freely, with no hesitation whatsoever. When the company restructured, Marcus was moved to a new team at the same pay. 3 months later, a consultant was brought in to advise on the same routing inefficiencies Marcus had been solving quietly for a decade. The consultant's day rate was 4 times Marcus's monthly salary. Marcus sat in that meeting. He knew more than the consultant. He had known it longer. What Marcus did not understand was that his knowledge was invisible equity. Equity he had been dispersing in small pieces to everyone around him at no charge. Not because he was naive. Because nobody had ever shown him the cost column on generosity. That is the second mechanism, undervaluation, not a lack of confidence in the casual sense, something more precise than that. Undervaluation happens when you calibrate your worth against your effort rather than against the outcome you produce. Marcus thought in terms of hours worked, problems solved, time spent. He did not think in terms of what those problems were worth to the company when solved. He measured inputs. The market pays for outputs. Every time you price yourself in effort, you hand the market a discount it did not earn. Here is a question worth sitting with. When was the last time someone paid you exactly what you asked, without negotiating, and seemed relieved to do it? If you struggle to remember, that is data. Specifically, it is data about where your price has been set relative to where it could be. There is a third mechanism. It is the quietest of the three. Visibility fear. You have probably called it humility. It is not the same thing. Humility is knowing your limits. Visibility fear is shrinking before anyone challenges you. It is saying, I just figured this out when you solved something that took others years to crack. It is framing your expertise as luck. It is sending a long email full of your most specific knowledge, and then signing off with, let me know if this helps, instead of my rate for this type of consulting is here. Visibility fear keeps the proximity premium out of reach, because the proximity premium requires someone to see you clearly, and you keep stepping sideways out of the light. The proximity premium is real. It operates like this. When you are close to a problem someone needs solved, you are worth more than an equivalent expert who is further away. A real estate investor who grew up in a specific neighborhood knows things no algorithm can replicate. A nurse who has worked a particular wing of a hospital for 8 years holds clinical pattern recognition that a textbook cannot produce. A first-generation immigrant who built a business in a community most consultants never enter has market intelligence that major firms would pay for if it were packaged correctly. The premium already exists. The only variable is whether you charge it. But here is what visibility fear does to the proximity premium. It makes you describe yourself as familiar with instead of the person who knows this better than anyone in the room. The market hears familiar with and assigns a trainee price. You trained for a decade to be called familiar. Now, the mirror moment. Think about 3 years ago. Where were you in whatever you are building right now? What did you know then that felt ordinary to you and would have genuinely helped someone who was 1 year behind you? And how many times since then have you given that knowledge away in a conversation, an email, a phone call, a coffee meeting with no charge, no structure, no return? Not because you are bad at business, because the reflex ran faster than the decision. That knowledge has a buyer. It had a buyer 3 years ago. The buyer existed then. You just never found each other because you did not present the knowledge as something with a price. There are 3 specific places where people give their core asset away. At least one of them is yours right now. The first is the informal consult. This is the phone call that begins with, "I just need 10 minutes," and ends 45 minutes later with the other person having a roadmap and you having a cold coffee. The second is the demonstration of value before the sale. This is the full proposal, the detailed plan, the complete solution delivered in the pitch meeting before any agreement exists. A habit that trains people to expect your best work for free because you keep providing it. The third is the content trap. This is where the line between building credibility and giving away your livelihood is razor thin. Most people fall to the wrong side of it because they were told visibility is always good. Visibility is only good when it moves people toward a transaction, not past it. You can build real credibility and still hold back the core. The question is always, which part of what I know attracts the right people and which part is the work itself? Attract with the edge of the map. Charge for the territory. Now close the loop. The moment the market decides what you are worth, it is not when you set your rate. It is not when you write your bio. It is not when you deliver your best work. The market decides what you are worth in the first 10 seconds after it asks you to justify your price and you respond. That moment, the pause before you speak, the energy in your voice, the degree to which you hold the number or apologize for it, that single exchange is the price signal. Everything before it is set up. Everything after it is either confirmation or negotiation. And if you flinch in that moment, if your voice drops or you immediately offer a discount before they even push back, the market registers that you were not sure either. It confirms your doubt as its own assessment. The market will always take your self-appraisal seriously. This is not cruelty. It is information. The market is not against you. It is just paying attention. It reads the signal you send with more accuracy than you intend to send it. Giving your core asset away does not signal generosity to the market. It signals that you do not fully understand what you hold. And the market, with cold and total efficiency, will agree with you. Stop agreeing with your own undervaluation. You have been building an inventory throughout this book, even if you have not written anything down yet. The full accounting of what you actually carry is beginning to take shape. But an inventory without prices attached is just a list. A list does not earn. As this book keeps moving, we will reach an idea about building credibility that runs straight against the usual belief. When that point settles, it starts changing how you present everything you know. But before that, the question you need to answer now is this. What is the one specific thing you know how to do, not broadly, not vaguely, one specific thing that someone would pay for today if you charged for it instead of giving it away? Chapter 10. The packaging problem is costing you millions. Something valuable is sitting inside you right now and it is producing nothing. Not because it lacks worth, not because nobody needs it, because nobody can find it, point to it, pick it up, and hand over money for it. That is the loss, and it is not a small one. Every week your knowledge exists only as a behavior. Every month your experience lives only as a habit. Every year your hard-won understanding circulates only in casual conversation. That is compounding cost, not dramatic. Invisible daily, the value does not disappear, it simply never converts. And conversion is the entire difference between an asset and a story you tell about yourself. Something made that gap permanent for most people. It was not talent. It was not timing. It was packaging. This chapter is going to show you exactly what that means. You already heard the question at the end of the last chapter. What is the one specific thing you know how to do that someone would pay for today if you charged for it instead of giving it away? Sit with that question for a moment before you move past it. Most people hear a question like that and they name something, feel a small flicker of possibility, and then immediately talk themselves out of it. They say, people can find this for free. They say, who am I to charge for this? They say, I would not even know how. The first two objections are about confidence. The third one is the real one. Who am I to charge for this? That is a confidence problem and it will get handled. But I would not even know how. That is a packaging problem. And packaging problems are costing people with real marketable knowledge an enormous amount of money. Not someday. Right now. Here is what nobody explains clearly enough. An asset nobody can buy is not an asset. It is a potential that remains theoretical. A house no one can purchase has no price. A service no one can find has no market. A skill no one can hire has no value in the economic sense, only in the personal sense. And personal value, however real, does not pay your bills, build your net worth, or give you options. The invisible equity you carry, the years of pattern recognition, the problem-solving instincts, the hard lessons coded into your reflexes, all of that sits outside the economy until you build a door. Packaging is the door. Open this question in your mind and hold it. Why do two people with identical knowledge earn radically different incomes from that knowledge? One charges $400 for what the other gives away at dinner. One gets hired internationally for what the other explains for free to grateful strangers. The answer is not located in the knowledge itself. This chapter will close that question before it ends. And what you find inside that answer will matter more than any tactical advice you have ever received. First, though, you need to understand the problem at its root. Most people who possess a valuable intangible asset, a skill, a process, a body of knowledge, an access network, have never taken an inventory of it. They have never looked at it the way a buyer would. They experience it from the inside as something they do, not as something someone else needs. That internal view makes the asset invisible to the market. You cannot sell what you cannot describe in terms of what it solves. And you cannot describe it in those terms if you have never translated it from the language of doing to the language of receiving. This is the packaging problem at its core. Not how to build a website, not how to set a price. The fundamental challenge is translation from what you know to what someone else experiences as a result of what you know. Until that translation exists, your asset has no address. And without an address, no one can find their way to it. Picture the shape of your life at that point 3 years back, not in some grand sense. Think practically. What did you know then that you did not fully value? What were you doing for people, colleagues, friends, people who found you through other people, without charging for it, without even framing it as a service? 3 years ago, there was almost certainly something you were offering the world at $0 that the world was gladly accepting. The market was already telling you something. It was sending a signal. You just did not have the framework to hear it as economic information. That signal is called a proximity premium. When people consistently seek you out, when they bypass the internet, bypass Google, bypass every free resource available to them, and come directly to you, they are paying you a compliment that has a dollar value attached to it. They are paying a proximity premium in trust and time, even when they are not yet paying in money. The market already knows. The market has been knowing. The only thing missing is the package. Now here is the framework that changes what you do next. There are 4 packaging models that cover nearly every intangible asset that can be monetized. Every category of knowledge, skill, access, and process fits into at least one of them. Understanding which model fits your asset is the difference between circling the idea of monetization for another 3 years and actually building a revenue stream this year. The first model is the done-for-you model. You perform the thing. You produce the outcome. The client receives a result, not a lesson. If you are a copywriter, a consultant, a specialist of any kind who delivers a finished work product, this is your natural packaging model. The price is anchored to the outcome, not the hours. This is important. When packaging is done correctly in this model, the client is not paying for your time. They are paying for the specific change your work produces in their situation. The packaging shift here is learning to describe your output in terms of their outcome, not in terms of your process. The second model is the done-with-you model. You and the client work together toward a result they could not achieve alone at the speed they need. Coaching, advising, hands-on consulting, collaborative strategy work, these all live in this model. The value here is your presence, your pattern recognition, your ability to see the thing the client cannot see because they are too close to it. What you are packaging is perspective. And perspective, when it shortens the distance between where someone is and where they need to be, carries an enormous price tag. People do not pay for perspective in the abstract. They pay for perspective applied to their specific situation. Package it that way. The third model is the taught once sold many model. A course, a workshop, a digital resource. A structured system someone can move through without your live presence. This model requires the most upfront translation work because you have to externalize the entire process, take what lives in your head and your hands and build a path someone else can walk. The leverage here is extraordinary. You create the asset once. It serves people continuously. But here is where most people underestimate the packaging demand. A collection of information is not a product. A sequence of videos is not a product. A product is a container that moves someone from a defined starting condition to a defined ending condition. The packaging work in this model is building that container, knowing precisely who starts where they are trying to get, and designing every step as a bridge between those 2 points. The fourth model is the access model. You sell proximity to a person, a community, a network, or a resource that the buyer cannot easily reach on their own. Membership communities, mastermind groups, curated networks, exclusive event access, these are all access models. The invisible equity here is often your network itself, the people you know, the rooms you can enter, the trust you have built in specific circles. This is perhaps the hardest model for most people to see as legitimate because it does not feel like a product. It feels like friendship. It feels like privilege. But access has always had a market price. The only question is whether you are the one who sets it. Now close the question you have been holding. Why do 2 people with identical knowledge earn completely different incomes from it? Because income does not come from knowledge. Income comes from packaged knowledge. The person earning $400 for what you explain for free at dinner is not smarter than you. They are not more credentialed. They are not luckier. They built a package. They named it, priced it, described it in terms of what it does for the buyer and made it purchasable. That is the entire gap. That is the invisible mechanism behind what looks, from the outside, like a talent difference or a network difference or a luck difference. It is a packaging difference. So here is where you need to be honest with yourself. You have a model now, 4 of them. Look at what you identified at the end of the last chapter, that one specific thing you know how to do that someone would pay for today. Which model fits it? Not which model sounds most impressive or most scalable or most profitable in the abstract. Which model fits your asset as it actually exists and fits your life as it is actually structured right now. Done for them, with them, taught and scaled, or proximity sold. One of those four is the natural shape of your asset. Finding that shape is the work of this week, not this year. There is something else you need to hear before this chapter ends. Everything in this book has been moving toward one specific moment of reckoning. Earlier chapters asked you to see the value you carry. Recent chapters have asked you to understand how that value moves in a market. This chapter gives you the structure to make it purchasable, and all of it is preparing you for what comes next, the inventory you never took. The full accounting. Not just one skill, not just one model, but the complete landscape of what you actually own. Because once you see the whole inventory, the packaging choices you make will not be small experiments. They will be deliberate deployments of real equity. An asset nobody can buy is not an asset. The question waiting for you now is this: once you know everything you own, how do you decide where to start? Chapter 11. Rich buyers are already looking for you. You don't have to find the market. The market is already looking for you. That sounds like the kind of optimistic reassurance you've heard before and never quite believed. It is not reassurance. It is a description of how demand works when supply is invisible. Right now, in the economy you are living inside, supply is invisible because most people don't know they have it. The wealthy are not sitting in offices waiting to be pitched. They are actively searching. They are running searches, making calls, hiring intermediaries, and writing checks to people who have exactly what you are sitting on. The only reason they haven't found you yet is that you haven't made yourself findable. By the time this chapter ends, you will understand not only that the demand is real, but exactly where it lives and why it has been circling closer to you than you realized. Settle on the question driving this chapter, and it matters that you hold it before you get the answer. If buyers are already searching, why do so many people with valuable assets never get found? That question deserves a real answer, and it will get one. But first you need to see the market itself, not as an abstraction but as a living system with specific behaviors you can learn to read. Every year, companies that look large and secure on paper spend enormous sums acquiring something they cannot build internally. Not factories, not warehouses, not fleets of vehicles. They acquire knowledge. They acquire networks. They acquire the trust that someone spent years earning inside a specific industry or community. When a regional bank gets absorbed by a larger institution, the acquiring bank isn't primarily after the deposits. It is after the relationships those local bankers hold. When a private equity firm buys a niche consulting company with 12 employees, they are not buying the desks. They are buying the reputation that allows those 12 people to walk into rooms the acquirer cannot enter on their own. The asset is invisible. The price is not. This happens constantly. It happens in industries you would never associate with intangible value. A logistics company in the Midwest acquires a smaller operation not for its trucks, but for its contracts and the institutional knowledge of one man who has handled the same 3 manufacturing clients for 19 years. A pharmaceutical distributor writes a check for a small regional advisory firm because that firm's founder knows which hospital administrators will take a meeting and which ones won't. You would not read about these deals in the news. They don't generate headlines, but they generate wealth for the person who understood that what they held was worth something to someone bigger. That is the market. It does not announce itself. It operates through quiet outreach, through introductions, through conversations that begin with a version of the phrase, "We've been looking for someone like you." Revisit the shape of your life at that point 3 years back, not in terms of where you wanted to be, but in terms of what you actually knew. What rooms had you been in? What problems had you solved quietly, repeatedly, without anyone naming it as expertise? What did people ask you about not once, but again and again, because they knew you would have something useful to say? 3 years ago, that knowledge was already accumulating. You were already building something. The question is whether you recognized it as an asset, or whether you treated it as just your job, just your hobby, just the thing you happen to know. Most people treat it as just the thing they happen to know. And that is precisely why the market cannot find them. There is a man named Curtis who spent 11 years as the operations manager for a mid-sized food distribution company in a mid-sized city. He knew the regulatory environment for cold chain logistics in his state better than almost anyone. He knew which inspectors were strict and which weren't. He knew which suppliers cut corners and which ones would sacrifice margin to protect their certification. He knew the timing windows, the documentation requirements, the informal relationships that kept product moving without incident. To Curtis, this was just his job. It was the accumulated sediment of 11 years of showing up and solving problems that no one else wanted to touch. When his company was acquired, the acquiring firm offered him a standard severance and a handshake. He almost took it. Instead, Curtis called a former colleague who had moved into consulting. That colleague told him something simple but precise. The knowledge you have is not common. It is not even close to common. 3 other distribution companies in adjacent states have compliance problems right now that they would pay to solve quietly. Curtis spent 6 months working with one of those companies on a contract basis. Then 2 more called. He never posted on any platform. He never wrote a single piece of public content. What he did was allow himself to be introduced to the people who were already searching for exactly what he had. Within 4 years, Curtis was earning more than twice his previous salary. He was working with 4 clients and fielding acquisition interest from a consulting firm that wanted to absorb his practice. The market found him, because once he understood the value of what he carried, he stopped hiding it. Here is the principle embedded in that story. It is the one most people never encounter. The wealthy are not waiting to be sold to. They are already buying. The question is not whether a transaction will happen. The question is whether you will be on the right side of it when it does. This is where the proximity premium becomes something more than a concept. The proximity premium is the price someone pays to get closer to something they cannot easily access. Access to knowledge they don't have. Access to relationships they cannot easily build. Access to credibility they would have to spend years earning. When you hold any of these things, you are not just a person with skills. You are a source of access. And access, in a market where relationships determine outcomes, is the most consistently expensive thing that exists. Wealthy people understand this intuitively. You can see it in how they spend money. A significant portion of high net worth spending is not on luxuries. It is on proximity. It is on advisors who know the right people, on lawyers who have handled these exact situations before, on consultants who have already walked into the rooms that the buyer needs to enter. They are not buying credentials. They are buying access. They are buying the invisible equity that someone else built through years of presence in a specific space. And the supply of that kind of access is almost always undersupplied relative to the demand. This is the part that most people find genuinely difficult to believe. The difficulty is understandable. You have been taught implicitly and sometimes explicitly. That value is created by doing more, building more, accumulating more. You have been told that the way to increase what you're worth is to add more credentials, more visible accomplishments, more measurable output. And so when someone suggests that you may already be holding something valuable, the instinct is to say, that can't be right. Because if it were right, wouldn't someone have already told me? Here is why no one told you. The people who benefit from finding undersupplied assets have no incentive to broadcast where those assets are. When a well-connected venture advisor identifies a founder with rare distribution knowledge in a specific niche market, they do not publish a newsletter announcing that discovery. They make a quiet introduction. They collect a fee or an equity position. The transaction happens in a world where most people are not watching. This is not a conspiracy. It is simply how private markets behave. Public markets are visible by design. Private markets are private by design. And almost all the transactions involving intangible personal assets happen in the private market, which is why you have never seen them clearly. Now here is where you close the gap. Making yourself findable does not require broadcasting everything you know. It requires strategic visibility inside specific places where buyers already look. Think about how buyers in your area of expertise actually search. They do not typically run a public job posting when they want access to specialized knowledge. They ask their network. They reach out to people they trust and say, "Do you know anyone who deeply understands this thing?" They attend specific events, read specific publications, belong to specific communities. These are the rooms that matter. These are the places where your presence, even quiet, even restrained, creates the conditions for discovery. One conversation placed in the right room is worth 100 pieces of content placed in front of the wrong audience. This is why the inventory you never took is not just a self-awareness exercise. It is a market positioning exercise. When you know precisely what you hold, you can describe it in language that the right buyer recognizes immediately. You stop speaking in generalities. You stop saying you're good with people or that you have a lot of experience. You say something specific, something that lands, something that causes the person you're speaking with to pause and think, "We have been looking for exactly this." That pause is worth more than a polished resume. It is worth more than a long list of credentials. It is the sound of invisible equity being recognized by someone who knows its price. The market already knows that what you carry exists. It has been searching for it across networks and introductions and quiet conversations you were not part of. The only thing standing between you and that search is your own clarity about what you're offering. The wealthy are not waiting. The question that carries you into the next chapter is this. Once you are findable, once the right buyer pauses at the right moment, what do you do with the next 30 seconds? Chapter 12. You have always been an asset holder. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen understood one thing before it understood almost anything else. There is a difference between what a person carries and what a person knows they carry. Across cultures separated by centuries and oceans, the same discovery surfaces again and again. The person who could see the full value of what they already held always moved differently than the person who could only count what was visible. Not louder, not with more force, differently. Quieter and more certain. That gap between carrying something and knowing you carry it has shaped more financial outcomes than any market crash, any lucky investment, or any inherited advantage. You have been living in that gap. This chapter is the moment you step out of it. The previous chapter left you standing at a doorway. You ask the right question. You became findable, the right buyer paused, and the 30 seconds arrived. But here is what nobody tells you about that moment. The reason most people freeze is not lack of preparation. It is something deeper. They freeze because, in that exact instant, they do not fully believe they are holding something worth buying. That disbelief is not random. It was taught to you slowly over years. Here is the open question that will thread through everything you hear in the next several minutes. If you have always been an asset holder, why has no one in your life ever called you that? Hold that. The answer is coming. But first, you need to feel the full weight of what was done to your self-perception. You were handed a measuring stick early. The measuring stick only measured visible things: bank account balance, property title, car year, job title printed on a business card. The culture you grew up inside repeated one message in 100 different voices. Wealth is what you can see, count, and hold in your hand. That message was not malicious. Most of the people who passed it along genuinely believed it, but it was wrong in one precise, costly way. It told you to take a partial inventory and call it the whole picture. Call up the shape of your life at that point 3 years back. Not the circumstances, not the address, not the number in your account. Think about what you knew. Think about who you knew. Think about what problems you had already solved for other people, even informally, even without being paid. Think about the rooms you had already been inside, the conversations you had already navigated, the moments where someone looked at you and said, "How did you figure that out?" That was not nothing. That was equity. It simply had no line item on any balance sheet you had ever been handed. Sandra, who you met earlier in these pages, did not find a new skill before her income changed. She found an existing one she had stopped counting. Marcus did not acquire something he lacked. He placed a fair price on something he had been giving away. The inventory was always there. What changed was the act of taking it seriously. You have been doing the same work throughout this book. Quietly, chapter by chapter, you have been cataloging what you actually hold. The knowledge that specific people in specific situations will pay to access. The network that carries a proximity premium you never named aloud. The credibility that makes the market pause before it moves on. These are not soft, motivational concepts dressed up in financial language. They are assets with buyers, and you have been holding them without a price tag. Here is the thing about price tags. The market does not wait for you to attach one. It assigns its own. If you do not name your value, someone nearby will name it for you. Usually lower, because lower protects their interests, not yours. Every week you move through the world without a clear internal accounting of what you hold. You are not standing still. You are letting someone else do the math. Now close the loop on the question from a few minutes ago. Why has no one in your life called you an asset holder? Because the people around you were working from the same incomplete measuring stick. They were not withholding information out of cruelty. They simply did not have the framework to see it themselves. The vocabulary of invisible equity has historically lived inside certain rooms. Boardrooms, investment conversations, negotiations between people who already knew how to talk about value. It was not taught in classrooms where your financial beliefs were first formed. It was not part of the conversation at dinner tables where people worried about bills. So the people who loved you could not give you what they did not have. That is not a wound. That is simply a gap that ends here. Consider a woman named Yemi. She spent 11 years working in a hospital billing department, memorizing the exact language insurance companies use to deny claims and the exact language that forces them to reverse those denials. She never thought of this as an asset. It was just her job. One afternoon, a friend asked her casually to look at a rejected claim for her small business. Yemi fixed it in 20 minutes, recovering $4,000 the business had written off as gone. Her friend told someone else. That someone told a colleague. Within 8 months, Yemi was consulting on the side, charging $200 per claim reviewed, working 6 hours a week. She had not learned a single new thing. She had simply allowed someone to name, out loud, the value she had been sitting on for over a decade. The skill had always been an asset. The market already knew. Yemi just finally did too. What Yemi understood eventually is what this entire book has been building toward. Your net worth has always been larger than your bank account. You are simply working from an incomplete inventory. The bank account is real and it matters and it will grow, but it has never been the whole picture. It has been one line in a ledger that was never fully written. You are writing the rest of the ledger now. This is not a metaphor for confidence. This is not an encouragement to feel good about yourself. This is a structural claim about how financial value actually works in a market where the most sought-after things are increasingly invisible. Specialized knowledge, trusted access, earned credibility, the ability to navigate rooms that have friction for everyone else. The people who are buying these things are not sentimental about it. They pay because the asset solves a real problem. They pay because finding it elsewhere costs more than paying you. That calculation was always true. You simply were not inside the room where it was being made. You are inside the room now. And the identity that fits this room is not something you need to build from scratch. It is something you need to stop subtracting from. Every time you say, "I am not really an expert," you subtract. Every time you describe what you do in the smallest possible terms, you subtract. Every time you accept a price someone else assigned to your time without running your own numbers first, you subtract. The subtraction was trained into you. It is not who you are. Who you are is someone who has been holding assets in the dark, waiting for the right accounting. The accounting is done. The inventory is yours. In a later section, we will reach an idea about the right moment to start putting a price on what they hold that runs straight against the usual belief. After that really registers, it starts changing not just how you think but how you act within the next 24 hours. But right now, sit with this. You did not arrive at this chapter empty-handed. You arrived carrying everything you have ever learned, everyone you have ever known, every problem you have ever solved, and every room you have ever earned your way into. That is not a starting point. That is a portfolio. The only question left is whether you will finally own it. The asset was never missing. You were the one who had not taken the full count. Chapter 13. Stop waiting for permission to charge. You have done the work. You know that already. The hours you spent learning the thing, practicing it, failing at it, refining it, those are not hypothetical. They happened. And somewhere along the way you got very good at something that other people find genuinely difficult, genuinely confusing, or genuinely out of reach. You know this is true. So here is the question that deserves a real answer. Why are you still doing it for free, for far less than it is worth? Or not doing it at all because you are waiting for someone to tell you that you are ready, not as an accusation, as an observation, because the waiting is costing you something specific. Every week that passes while you hold that asset in reserve, someone else less experienced, less precise, less close to the problem is charging for a version of what you already have. They are not better than you. They simply stopped waiting. The answer to why you are still waiting is buried in this chapter. Once you see it clearly, the waiting will feel like what it actually is. A choice, not a circumstance. Here is what the full count reveals. After everything this book has walked you through, the invisible equity sitting in your experience, the proximity premium embedded in how close you are to a real problem, the fact that the market already knows what it needs. After all of that, the last barrier is rarely information. It is permission. You are waiting for something outside of you to confirm that your asset is real enough, valuable enough, yours enough to charge for, and that confirmation is never coming. Not because your asset is not real, but because the market does not work that way. The market does not hold a ceremony. There is no credential delivered to your door that says you are now authorized to offer what you know. The market only does one thing in response to what you carry. It responds, or it does not. And it cannot respond to something you have not offered. Bring to mind the shape of your life at that point 3 years back. Not metaphorically. Actually think about it. The thing you now do with ease, the thing people ask you about, the thing you explain to others without effort 3 years ago, you were learning that. You were uncertain about it. You were researching it. At some point between then and now, without fanfare, you crossed a line. You became someone who knows. The question is not whether that crossing happened. It did. The question is why you are still treating yourself as though you are on the other side of it. There is a name for the thing you are doing. Practitioners call it expertise amnesia. You forget what it cost you to learn what you now carry easily. The difficulty fades. The hours blur. What remains feels ordinary to you because you live inside it. But to the person who has not crossed that line yet, what you carry is not ordinary at all. Consider a woman named Renata. She spent 11 years working inside supply chain logistics for mid-sized manufacturers. She knew the software, knew the vendors, knew where the waste lived and exactly how to cut it. When she left that industry to start a small product business of her own, she did not advertise that knowledge. She did not charge for it. She assumed everyone in business understood what she understood. Then one afternoon, a neighbor mentioned his small factory was hemorrhaging money somewhere in his procurement process, but he could not find the leak. Renata, almost by accident, spent 40 minutes asking him questions and listening to his answers. By the end of the conversation, she had identified 2 specific issues. The neighbor asked her what she charged for consulting. She laughed. She told him she was not a consultant. He looked at her with genuine confusion and said, "But you just did what I have been paying someone $3,000 a month not to do." She walked home and stood in her kitchen for a long time. That conversation did not give Renata expertise. She already had it. What it gave her was a mirror. It showed her that the expertise she carried so lightly had real weight to someone standing outside it. The proximity that made her knowledge feel ordinary was not a discount. It was the credential itself. The fact that she had lived inside that problem for 11 years, made mistakes inside it, solved it from the inside out, that was worth more, not less, than a theoretical understanding acquired from a distance. She made an offer the following week, a real one with a real number attached, and the number was accepted. Here is the principle underneath that story. Your closeness to your asset is not evidence that it is too common to charge for. It is evidence that you understand it at a depth a newcomer cannot fake. The proximity premium is not marketing language. It is an economic fact. The person who learned supply chain logistics from a textbook and the person who bled through 11 years of real decisions are not carrying the same thing. The market knows this, even when you forget it. But Renata's neighbor could not respond to what she was not offering. That is the part that matters. You have spent most of this book taking inventory. You have counted what you carry. You have seen where invisible equity lives and why so many people walk past it without ever placing a value on it. You have understood that the belief holding most people back is not laziness or lack of intelligence. It is the old story that only tangible things count. Only what you can see and stack and hold in your hand. That story kept you from looking. This book asked you to look, and now you have looked. The final barrier is not knowledge. It is the offer. An offer is not a performance. It is not a declaration. It is a simple, specific statement of what you provide, who you provide it for, and what you charge. 3 elements. That is it. You do not need a website that is perfect. You do not need a title that is polished. You do not need a portfolio that is complete. You need one honest offer made to one real person who has the problem you solve. The open question this chapter started with, "Why are you still waiting?" closes here. You are waiting because an offer that is rejected is a data point you cannot unknow. Staying quiet feels safer than reaching out and hearing no. The waiting is not indecision. It is protection. You are protecting yourself from the specific discomfort of being seen, counted, and told you are not enough. But here is what no one says clearly enough. The no does not mean what you are afraid it means. A no means the offer did not land with that person, at that price, at that time. It is a calibration. It is not a verdict. Every person who now charges confidently and consistently for what they know has a collection of no's behind them that taught them how to make a better offer. The no's are not proof you were wrong to try. They are part of how the market responds. And a market that responds is a market you are finally in. You have taken the inventory. You have counted the asset. You have seen that it was never missing. Now make the offer this week. One offer. Real number, real person, real problem you already know how to solve. Not when the website is ready. Not when the testimonials exist. Not when you feel fully certain. This week. The market does not grant permission. It only ever responds to what you put in front of it. Chapter 14. The wealthy version of you was always plausible. Every civilization that has ever risen and fallen left behind the same unspoken question scratched into its ruins. Not how did we build this, but who decided they were the kind of person who could. Across every era, in every tongue, on every patch of earth where human beings gathered and traded and competed, the ones who ended up holding the most did not always start with the most. They started with a particular recognition. They saw something in themselves before the world confirmed it. What you are about to encounter in the next few minutes is not motivation. It is not encouragement. It is a reckoning. The truth that runs through every page of this book has been circling one conclusion, and you have arrived at it now. The wealthy version of you was not a fantasy. It was always the most plausible version of you. The only question that remains is whether you are willing to stop treating your greatest asset like a rumor you heard about yourself. The market does not grant permission. It only ever responds to what you put in front of it. You heard that at the end of the last chapter, and it probably landed cleanly, the way a true thing does. But here is what that sentence demands of you now. If the market only responds to what you put in front of it, then the single most important question of your financial life is not what do I need to acquire. It is what am I failing to present. Think about that for a moment. Somewhere along the way, you absorbed a definition of wealth that required you to first possess something visible. A property, a portfolio, a business with a physical address and a logo on the door. The culture told you that wealth was a collection of things you could point to, count, photograph, and show to a bank. And because you did not yet have those things, you concluded you did not yet have anything. That conclusion was the error. It was not a moral failure. It was not stupidity. It was a very reasonable response. to a very incomplete education. The invisible equity you carry, the knowledge you have built, the network that trusts your judgment, the specific skill that a room full of strangers would pay to sit close to, none of that was ever counted in the inventory you took of yourself, which means the inventory was always wrong. Here is the open question that has been sitting underneath this entire book. Not the surface question of what is an intangible asset, but the deeper one. Why do some people deploy what they know and others never do? Why does one person sit on 30 years of expertise and die without charging for it, while someone with far less experience builds a business, a reputation, and a life that compounds? The difference is not talent. It is not luck in the way people mean when they use that word to let themselves off the hook. The difference is this. The person who deploys their asset decided at some point, probably quietly, with no audience and no applause, that what they carried was real. They took the inventory. They looked at what was actually there, and then they treated it like property. Meet a woman named Constance. She spent 19 years as a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized freight company. She was not the founder. She was not in sales. She was the person who made sure everything that was supposed to move actually moved, and moved on time, and arrived intact. She solved problems that cost companies money when they went unsolved. And for 19 years she called this a job. She called it a skill set. She called it experience. What she never called it was an asset. Then one afternoon her company downsized and Constance was handed a severance check and a Friday afternoon to clean out her desk. She was 51 years old. She had no property in her name and no investment account worth talking about. By every visible metric, she looked like someone starting over with nothing. But she had 19 years of solving expensive problems. She knew exactly which mistakes cost freight companies the most. She knew the vendors, the bottlenecks, the contract clauses that protected the wrong party. 3 months after her last day, she sent 6 emails to 6 companies, not asking for a job, asking if they had a logistics problem they had not solved yet. 4 of them responded. She consulted. Then she retained. 2 years later, she had 3 ongoing clients paying her a monthly fee to prevent the exact losses she had spent 2 decades watching companies absorb. What changed was not what she knew. What changed was what she called it. The market already knew her value. It had been paying for it indirectly for 19 years. She just stopped letting someone else collect the premium. That is the proximity premium. The market pays for access to what you know. It always has. The question is only whether you or someone else has positioned themselves to receive that payment. Go back to the shape of your life at that point 3 years back, not in general terms but specifically. What did you know then that you are still sitting on? What problem could you solve in your sleep that someone else is struggling with right now? What access do you have? What room do you walk into? What relationship do you carry that a person trying to build what you have built would pay a serious price to get close to? Think about it honestly, not modestly. Modesty is not a financial strategy. Think about it the way a buyer thinks when they are looking for something the market is not making easy to find. Because here is what this whole book has been building toward. The inventory you never took was not missing data. It was a decision you were postponing. You were waiting until you felt certain enough, accomplished enough, visible enough before you looked at what you already had and said, "This is real, this has value, this belongs in a ledger somewhere." That postponement had a cost. Every month you deferred the inventory was a month the asset sat idle, not invisible, idle, because it was never invisible. The people around you could already see it. The colleagues who called you first. The friends who asked your opinion before making decisions. the strangers who paid attention when you spoke in rooms where other people were ignored. The market could already see it. It was waiting for you to see it too. You are not behind. That is the revelation this chapter is built to deliver, and it is worth sitting with. You have been misreading the ledger. You have been looking at the asset column and seeing it as empty because it contained nothing tangible, nothing you could deposit or insure or put in a filing cabinet. But the column was full. It has been full for years. The only thing missing was your willingness to count what was there. So here is the final thing this book asks of you. It is a small thing that is actually enormous. Say it aloud. Not in your head, where it can stay abstract and protected and untested. Aloud, where it becomes a claim on the world instead of a thought inside it. Name the asset you carry. Be specific. Not a category, not a vague domain, but the precise thing. The network in a particular industry. The ability to read a specific kind of problem before it compounds. The credibility in a room that certain other people cannot access without you. Name it, claim it. Because the moment you name it, it stops being potential and starts being property. And property, unlike potential, can be deployed. The wealthy version of you was not waiting on a windfall. It was not waiting on a better market, a better economy, a better family, or a better starting point. It was waiting on this. The inventory, the naming. The decision to stop treating your greatest asset like something that needed to be earned before it could be used. It was always there. The path was always structurally available. The door was never locked. You were just standing on the wrong side of a belief, and now you have walked through. What you carry is real. It is yours. Start spending it.